Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our community forum. We're going to get started here in just a few minutes. We got some people in the waiting room. We'll get started in about 2 minutes. Good morning, everybody. It is 9 o'clock on the dot. We've got some more people in the waiting room. Just going to wait a couple of minutes so we can get everybody in. Great to see so many of you so far. We've got 24 people on the call. Some more folks are going to be joining us. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. It is 9:01 and my name is Bettina Swigger. I am the CEO of Downtown SLO, your downtown business association. Thank you so much for being with us this morning to have a very important discussion about the street improvements that are coming up this summer in the downtown, and then the outdoor dining and parklet program. We are really happy to be facilitating this program with our partners at the City of SLO. We have some subject matter experts who are going to go into detail on both of these topics this morning. It's been a while since we've had one of these big Zoom community meetings. So thank you very much to the members of our board of directors who are joining us. I see our president of the board, Stephanie Stackhouse, our past president, Laura Mullen. Thank you so much. Mark Rawson and Greg Holt. And if there's anyone else on the board that I can't see, thank you for being here too. We're really pleased to be having this conversation right now because for the last 2 years, we've had a really wonderful addition to our downtown. Our public spaces have been activated through emergency measures in a way that we could not have foreseen going back to 2019 or 2020 or in early 2020. But now it's the time to really look at how to improve our public spaces and make sure that our shared streets are accessible to all, and that there's a program in place that can make this long-term for our city. So we wanted to just start off this morning. We know that Zooms can sometimes be an opportunity to tune out, maybe take a phone call and check your email, but I'd like you to draw your attention to this screen for just a moment. We're going to launch a little poll. We want to hear from you about how you're feeling this morning, about the stuff that we're talking about this morning. So I'm going to ask Shannon from our team to launch that poll if we can, and you should see something pop up here. We're just going to ask you to do a little selection quickly. Also, a little bit of ground rules for the presentations today. We're going to start off with the street improvements section of the program, and then we will go into the section on the parklets and outdoor dining component. We're asking you, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat. We will have time for Q&A at the end if you'd like to ask questions directly to our presenters. There's also going to be a community forum, which is really more designed for the general public to participate in. That's going to be coming up at the City County Library on May 29th, I believe is the day for that event. And Adam and Jennifer can share more information about that. This session is really designed to get input from the business community. So we want you to really ask some hard questions and make sure that we can make this program the best that it can be before it goes before council. Shannon, can you go ahead and launch that poll?
Yeah, I've clicked the launch button. I'm not sure if everybody is seeing that.
Oh, great.
Can I get some hands? Are people seeing the poll or no? Okay,
let me try it.
There we go.
There we go.
Thank you.
We did this every week for a year and a half. You'd think that we would know how to do these for now. So thanks for your patience. So we're basically just asking, how are you feeling about the developing permanent parklet program? Just a quick 3, how are you feeling in this moment? No wrong answer. We just want to know how you're feeling. You've got 64, 67, 71, 75% participation. Come on, let's get it to 100. Oh, you guys are so good. Nice work, everybody. Taking those polls, we're at 85%. Okay, I think maybe the 4 of us who have not taken it are the presenters. So I'm going to go ahead and end it. Thank you all for participating. And we will share those results. It looks like the majority are feeling confident about how this is developing. There are some folks who are a little uneasy and some neutral folks. So our goal at the end of the session today is to move your feeling from uneasy or neutral to confident, at least about how you're understanding about the way that the program has been developed and how things are going to go going forward. So thanks for participating in that. And I'd like to, at this time, welcome our first speaker, Jennifer Rice from the City of San Luis Obispo. Welcome, Jennifer.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. I am going to share my screen. Let me know when that shows. I still see the polls on mine. Does everyone else still see the poll or no?
I just launched another one. Now we're going to ask about how you feel about the upcoming street improvement project. And again, our goal is that by the end of Jennifer's presentation, you're going to feel confident and not uneasy or neutral. You can go ahead and keep answering that. Jennifer, go ahead and start your presentation.
Oh, sure. And everyone can see my screen then as well?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Jennifer Rice. I'm a transportation planner engineer with the City of San Luis Obispo. And so I'll be talking specifically about the 2022 street improvement project. And I am going to focus on the downtown because that's, what our audience is today. So the entire 2022 Streets Improvements project is actually happening in many areas within the city. So again, I'll just be focusing on the downtown core. The overall goal of the project is to improve our streets and sidewalks, making them safer, more accessible, and sustainable for future use. So the project area in the downtown, on the north side, it's from Palm Street and then down to the south side on Pacific. So anything between Palm and Pacific. And then the east-west limits are Santa Rosa to Napomo. So basically that square that's shown up on the screen. And in general, the project includes resealing all of these streets, which is essentially just putting a protective layer on top of the existing streets. This graphic shows some other project elements. These elements have all had extensive community engagement over the past year and are consistent with the city's circulation plan, active transportation plan, downtown concept plan, and parking policies. I'll just kind of walk through a few of these and then we'll go into a little bit more detail about some. Higuera Street will have a buffered bike lane. Marsh Street will have a protected bike lane. High visibility crosswalk markings will be installed throughout the downtown core. Currently at the intersection of Marsh and Santa Rosa, it's the only intersection within the downtown that doesn't provide accessible, or it doesn't provide pedestrian access at every leg of the intersection. So as part of this project, we will be striping a crosswalk and modifying the signal phasing at that intersection to provide pedestrian access at that north leg. And then just additionally, street improvement projects of this scale are required to follow federal requirements for accommodation of accessible parking. So throughout the downtown core, approximately 20 parking spaces will be designated, on-street parking spaces will be designated as accessible spaces, and this is consistent with the federal guidelines and provisions for providing those accessible facilities. Slide here. So just a closer look at Marsh and Higuera Street. The rest of the streets within the downtown core will maintain their existing configuration. But I did want to look a little bit closer at Marsh and Higuera. So Higuera will be striped with a buffered bike lane, and this is actually the existing condition on Higuera Street. As the city did install the buffered bike lane and reduced the lane configuration from 3 travel lanes to 2 travel lanes as part of a pilot project in 2020. And this configuration was already consistent with the circulation element and the downtown concept plan, but that pilot installation really provided the opportunity for us to evaluate the configuration, and it has been successfully operated, or it's been successful operationally, even though we've seen our traffic volume start to return to those pre-pandemic levels. So this configuration also works with some of the other activities that we have going on in the downtown, like the farmers market, and then also just supporting all of those existing parklets that are on Higuera Street. On Marsh Street, we'll just be continuing the parking protected bike lanes that were installed on Marsh and Higuera on either side of the core this past fall. So you may already be familiar with that configuration. It will go from the 3 lanes to the 2 lanes, but then provide room for the parking protected bike lanes. The project will support various curbside activity, as of course, once the project's complete. On-street parking, so approximately 10 on-street parking stalls are planned for removal within the downtown core, and this is to provide adequate sight distance at certain driveways and intersections. That said, there's also existing parklets that are no longer being used, or they're adjacent to businesses that are no longer interested in using them. And so those are be scheduled to come up in the next several months or over the summer. And so by the time the project's complete, we actually estimate probably a net zero of parking loss within the downtown core, at least, the available parking that we've been used to over the last few years. The parklets will remain in place. The street improvement project will just work around and preserve these parklets during construction. Loading zones will be maintained in all of the existing locations with the project. And then I wanted to provide an update on the maintenance as well. The parklets and these protected bike lanes are, a new type of facility within the downtown, and they do require ongoing maintenance. And so the city has recently contracted with a contractor who will be sweeping weekly the parklets and the protected bike lanes all throughout the downtown. Okay, so construction and the schedule. This is some important information. Any of the work within the downtown core will start after September 1st, and that date is kind of based on past discussions and recommendation from the downtown community to avoid that peak time during the summer. Just in general, the working time is limited Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. The contractor does have specific requirements for Marsh and Higuera streets to maintain a minimum of 1 lane of travel prior to 10 a.m. and then always maintain 2 lanes of travel after 10 a.m. Some good news, the slurry seal is a quick operation. So as I said before, it's basically a protective layer on top of the existing roadway. So it's going to look a lot different than what you may remember from this last fall's project on Marsh and Higuera west of Napoma, where we actually did a full roadway reconstruction and the whole road was ground away and repaved. The sealing is just a quick overlay on top of the existing pavement. Typically, it will be about 1 to 2 days on any block or any segment at a time. And it just rolls right through. The contractor is required to provide at least 48-hour notice to all of the adjacent properties. And they typically do this with a door hanger or by going door to door. And either way, they do provide all of their contact information if for some reason the resident or tenant needs to contact them during construction. And then I did want to talk a little bit too about just the curbside activity during construction. So inevitably, parking lanes will be closed at certain times through the construction. And there's a couple different ways that we can notify and encourage drivers to park in the parking structures, which is probably the most safe option because the parking structures won't be impacted by the construction. Access to them will be open at all times. So some of the different ways that we can do that, the contractor does have to post no parking signs in whatever area they'll be working 30 hours prior. And they typically put that no parking sign on a sandwich board adjacent to the curb. And there's a place on there where we can include a note directing folks within, the next few days to try to use the parking garages during that time. The city will also be using our social media platforms to remind drivers to use the parking garages. And finally, the parking app for the downtown does have the capability to restrict parking in certain zones. And so we are working with our parking division to kind of look into options for that as well. Loading zones, just a comment. So throughout the construction, the project manager, the inspection team, and the parking division will be working collaboratively and working with the businesses just to ensure that there's adequate loading and unloading operations, even during the mix of all of this. The parklets, as I mentioned, they will be maintained and worked around during the sealing operations, so those can continue to operate as they do throughout construction. So parents, if you want to get some food and drink, post up in a parklet. Your kids can watch the construction and be entertained for hours and learn a little bit about public works. Something fun to do. And also a note about farmers market during construction as well. It should not be impacted at all. So those working hours do end at 4 p.m. and that's the time that the contractor must be completely done with the day's work and the roadway surface ready to be opened up to traffic. So there shouldn't be any issue or overlap with the farmers market vendors being able to start their setup at 5 p.m. Next slide. So a couple different ways to stay informed throughout the project. Again, the contractor is required to provide notice prior to starting the work. So you may receive notice that way if you're a business that's directly located to any of this, downtown core. So any of the project area, you will be notified by the contractor right before it happens. But you can also just stay up to date on our project's website, and that's listed here. You can take a screenshot or anything of this if you want. And the website will be updated throughout the project with different project updates or also just information on the traffic control updates as well. So that's a place that you can go to look for information. My contact information is up there also, so you can contact me directly at any time. And then once the project's underway, we'll also have the project inspector's contact information on the website as well. And they're really the key person to go through as far as communication and finding out what the exact schedule will be once the project's in construction. So that actually concludes my presentation, and I know we'll have time for some questions at the end, but I did want to kind kind of ask a couple questions or get you thinking of a couple things if there's any suggestions that you had for communication. So there's just been so much construction in the past couple of years within the downtown. So you've probably already experienced some of this. And if there was anything from those projects that worked well or didn't work well, or just any certain type of communication input, I would really love those suggestions. So again, thank you so much for having me today, and I look forward to the questions and the discussions.
Thanks, Jennifer. We do have a question in the chat, and I think it might be meaningful for the questions to come now. That's different from what I said at the beginning, but
no problem.
while things are fresh in our mind, the biggest issue with the buffered bike lanes on Higuera Street specifically is the delivery trucks. And so there's a question about lane closures to one lane prior to 10 a.m. That's when most of the deliveries come through. And those large 18-wheeler trucks are going to completely block the street. So what considerations are being given to delivery trucks, and how can businesses help plan ahead for that?
Sure, and that is a great question, because I think that the delivery is going to be one of the things that we have to make sure that we're all working together, especially, you know, between the businesses, the drivers of those, our parking division, the inspection team. So there's a couple different ways that it could be accommodated. You know, they don't close the entire road at one time while they're doing the sealing. They, you know, typically will use the parking lane, some of the bike lane area, and, you know, leave the couple other lanes open for traffic through. And it'll kind of just be set up so every block does have some area for a loading vehicle to be able to pull over and unload and load and unload. But again, that's going to just be something that the parking division, inspection team, the businesses all really communicate and know where, you know, have everyone's contact information and really understand at the time, you know, where they're going to be doing their delivery and everything.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. And Gavin, I'll let you talk a minute. I do want to just ask all of you who are business owners. I know one of the challenges is that while we may have contact information for the delivery drivers, they may be coming from far away and we don't know exactly when they're arriving, right? So that's been a challenge the entire time. Gavin, what were you going to say?
Yeah, just to add to that. So we are going to be adjusting the enforcement officers' schedules during this time period. So we have a larger presence out there in the earlier morning when we know it's going to be more impactful. The purpose of the parking enforcement officers during that period will be to make contact with delivery drivers and try to get them into compliance. Ideally, if we can get them onto the cross streets, that will be best for all portions of this operation. So that's going to be our focus, but we will work with the contractor to get them into the areas that they're not utilizing on Higuera or Marsh.
Thank you. And I have another question for you, Jennifer. Could you go back to the first slide where you had the map with the pedestrian thoroughfares? I'm not sure what you called those, but that was a term I was not familiar with. The high visibility crosswalk marking.
Oh, sure.
What does that mean?
Sure. So there are different types of you know, designs and crosswalks. And so the city, so a lot of the downtown actually has the paver crosswalks. So those will, you know, remain in place. Other crosswalk locations at the intersections where we just have a striped crosswalk. So they're just the white bars showing where the pedestrian crosses. The high visibility crosswalk still keeps, I should have just thrown a picture on here because that would be way easier, but it still keeps just the white parallel bars, and then it has really thick ladder style bars in between the parallel bars. So I'm sure that you've seen them all around town. They're a popular type of crosswalk striping marking that we do. The reason that we'll be kind of in general moving forward, anytime we have a striped crosswalk, we're adding those high visibility markings. It just really increases the visibility of the crosswalk from the view of the driver approaching it, because you see these kind of ladder style bars across. So right now we don't have high visibility crossings in a lot of the locations in the downtown, and it's our highest pedestrian, traveled area. So we just want to be adding those high visibility markings, make sure that those crosswalks are all like really readily seen by all of the drivers.
Okay, thank you. And not to hammer on this point too much, I'm not a traffic engineer. This is different from the light up beacon pedestrian crosswalks on Marsh Street, for example.
Yes, those are striped as the high visibility ones. But the high visibility striping is limited to just like the striping. So it doesn't necessarily include like flashing signs or anything like that. It just means that the striping on the pavement is this high visibility pattern.
Okay, thanks for explaining that. All right, does anybody else have any questions for Jennifer? All right, a quiet group this morning. Thank you all for being here again. Jennifer, thanks for that. And I want to say, I think it's good that we're calling it the Downtown Street Improvements Project. Oh, Pierre, we have a question from Pierre.
Yeah, in the past, we've talked about implementing a scramble system at a couple of intersections, particularly at Choro and Higuera, where it's really a tangle with people making left turns and so forth, and pedestrians blocking the access for, particularly here on Choro. And I wonder if that's been explored. We talked about doing it at Santa Rosa and Monterey at one time, and particularly here. You know what I mean by scramble, where there's pedestrians all go all ways all at one time, then when the traffic is closed. Has anyone looked into that?
We've looked into that for a couple different intersections. The long-term goal is to still, like a couple of those in some of our long-term planning documents are still identified as that type of a configuration. So it's not off the table. It's still something that in the future, we'll continue evaluating. We looked into it for a couple different intersections within the core for this particular project, and it wasn't going to be feasible as far as just being able to operate and get the traffic through the intersection that it needs to. That said, the Marsh the Monterey and Santa Rosa intersection is outside of this project area. And I know we're still working on some upgrades to that intersection and that signal. So I'm actually not positive on what the final outcome is there. Luke's on the line, so he might chime in on that one. But as far as the downtown core, we aren't doing any scramble phases, but we did look at a few and they're just not feasible at this time.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. I can expand on that. Great question here. Luke Schwartz, I oversee the transportation division at the city. We've looked at scramble crossings as a potential solution in the downtown quite a bit. The advantages are you completely separate the vehicular traffic movements from the pedestrian movements. And where they work really well in other places, they often have a lot higher crossing volume with pedestrians than we have at any of our intersections in the downtown, especially diagonal crossings. The advantage is you separate those movements. The disadvantage is you have to increase your cycle length. So both drivers and pedestrians would essentially be waiting twice as long to cross the street, depending on which direction you're going. What we are doing as kind of an interim measure is in parallel, we're working on a comprehensive signal timing optimization plan for the downtown, where our goal is to make better use of those lead pedestrian crossings, where if it's working the way we are moving towards, basically pedestrians will get a head start into the intersection, say 4 to 5 seconds. And then at the end of that phase, the pedestrian signal goes red and the drivers have another several seconds at the end of the cycle to clear the intersection with no pedestrians in it. So it's kind of a mini scramble, I'd say. And then as Jen mentioned, at the Monterey Santa Rosa intersection, we've had a history of pedestrian collisions at that. We have a signal reconstruction project that's going out to bid soon. And with that one, we're setting up the signal to be able to do a scramble if we think that's the right solution in the future. But what we're going to have as an interim is basically a really long pedestrian lead. You'll get 7-8 seconds, get most of the way or halfway at least across the intersection with no vehicles able to make turns across your path while you're crossing. And so trying to find a balance of like still making a really walkable environment for pedestrians where you're not waiting for like a minute at a time to cross. while still trying to make it safe and keep traffic moving. So it's certainly on our radar and something we'll continue to explore, but we didn't feel like it was a full scramble was the right solution at this time.
Great, thank you. That's a good question. Any other questions for Jennifer? Okay, well, let's move on. We are at just about 9:30, and I think main reason why many of you are here today is to talk about the permanent parklet program and the outdoor dining guide. So I'm going to launch another poll here for everybody to participate in. So if you take a minute to look away from your screen, if you could draw your attention back. As you all know, the parklets came on in an emergency moment in 2020, and now we are going to be looking at a permanent parklet program and outdoor dining guide. We internally at Downtown SLO have only had a chance to review the document cursorily. It came out yesterday morning for us, so we haven't had the chance to go over it line by line yet. And as I mentioned at the beginning, there is going to be a community forum at the City County Public Library on May 26th. So today's session is really about trying to get some business input on this program, and then there will be more opportunity for the public to join in and ask their questions and provide their input at that other session. So Adam Fukushima is here from the City of SLO, and Adam, I'm going to let you take it away to start telling us about what you've been doing and where we're going to go.
All right, thank you so much, Bettina. I really appreciate the opportunity to present information on the permanent parklet program directed, focused for the business community, because you are a very important partner and stakeholder in this program, and we want to make sure this works for you as well as for the public. Let me start off. See, you can all see my screen. Okay, so what we're doing is we're transitioning from the temporary emergency response of the pandemic to a permanent program. And I'll start off with some background. See. Oh, there we go. Okay. Last summer, we held a study session with the City Council asking them whether they wanted to even talk about transitioning to a permanent program. And the answer we got was a resounding yes. Their feedback was that in their mind, the parklet program was very successful. There are some tweaks we need to make, but it was very successful. We need to move toward a permanent program and get further input from the public and what kind of tweaks we want to make this permanent and make it work on a long-term basis. So we just released a draft guide on permanent dining. And what we're doing is we're releasing information on parklets, but we're also packaging it up with two already existing programs, and that is the sidewalk cafes and the tables and chairs permits. And just to give some very quick background on what those two things are. So sidewalk tables and chairs permits and sidewalk cafes permits have already existed. The tables and chairs are ones that are just purely and simple that tables and chairs that are on the sidewalk. A good example of that is by Louisa's. That provides opportunities for dining. At the end of the day, all this stuff has to come out and come back into the restaurant. And there's no alcohol service allowed. The next one is sidewalk cafes. Those are an area that is sectioned off by a permanent barrier where dining service is allowed. The difference with that is that alcohol service is allowed if you can get an ABC permit. The third one, which is one we're talking about mostly today, is parklets, and that's an area off of the sidewalk. So it's basically taking a parking spot and repurposing that for dining purposes. And a ABC permit, well, alcohol is allowed if you can get an ABC permit with that as well. So it works very similar to a sidewalk cafe permit. One thing that really informed the study session last summer was a survey we did that we pushed out, and we got a lot of response on that. We had over 7,000 responses, and that was shared out via the Chamber of Commerce, Downtown SLO. Thank you for Downtown SLO for helping us push that out. And we had over 70% of the respondents were city residents, and 20% of the respondents were representatives of local businesses. And 86 respondents said they had a current parklet or sidewalk dining permit. So we had pretty good representation of the community in this survey. The results were that we had 83% support for permanent parklets. Among the business representatives, that's looking at businesses citywide, not just downtown, but all throughout the city, there's 23% support. And then for those who already had temporary parklets, the support was 83% to make this a permanent program. As far as cost sharing goes, and we'll be talking more about this later in my presentation, of businesses who currently had a parklet, 23% were not willing to pay anything to retain the parklets. 31% were willing to pay some, about $1,000 to $2,000 annually to retain the parklets. And about 30% were willing to pay about $5,000 to $10,000 annually to retain the parklets. So there's some difference of opinion there. Some other key themes we found was that there was general support for a permanent program, but there were concerns about the loss of parking and the need for equity between the use of the public right of way and making sure that that there is some payment and fee for that use of public space. There also was a desire for a higher quality of design for the parklets. There was concern about the equity between businesses and non-business type of uses. There was concern about adjacent property owners, so basically having a parklet that extended into the frontage of a neighboring property. And then also just some general concern about the level of activation. There's a feedback we got that if folks are going to have parklets that need to be used on a regular basis, that need to be kept clean, and that need to be good street sweeping around those parklet facilities. Okay, so next I'll transition to the eligibility for the dining permits, and it's basically same as we had during the temporary program. And that is that fronting business or property owners are eligible to apply, but we're also opening it up to any nonprofit or community organizations that may want to apply for a parklet to provide a benefit for the public. And what we're looking at here is, maybe an organization like Downtown SLO may want to provide one. We also could have something like the SLO Museum of Art would like to have a parklet, or some other community or nonprofit organization would like to have a parklet to promote something of their mission, something that has more of a community benefit more than a commercial interest. But all of these parklets have to be on a street with adjacent on-street parking and have a speed limit of 25 miles per hour or less. And that's just purely on a safety basis. Design standards, what we're looking at with the permanent program, what we're proposing is moving more towards a more aesthetically pleasing and a stronger design of the parklets. So on the left is an example of some of the parklets we allowed during the pandemic, very bare bones, just trying to help people get back on their feet economically. We even provided many of these parklets to many of the businesses downtown to get them on their feet and promote use. Moving forward to the permanent program, we'll be looking more towards the picture on the right as an example of Kreuzberg, where you have a more aesthetically pleasing. It's either going to be wood or metal, something that incorporates landscaping and something that really reflects the beauty of the downtown environment. And I think that's one thing we heard loud and clear from the survey, and that's what we're proposing when we're moving forward. So in the guide that has just come out, and I'll provide more information where you can find that. You'll see design standards or design guidelines that we're looking for that provides that level of permanency. But we're also trying to make it flexible enough to allow for creativity. We know that there's certain businesses that may want to promote a certain design or aspect of their business, and we think it'd be great if we could have some unique aspects of each parklet to kind of reflect that. Okay. Other things we're looking at in the design standards is minimizing the encroachment into the adjacent property frontage without the consent of a neighbor. So what we're proposing is that if your parklet is encroaching more than 5 feet into the neighboring frontage, we will be requiring some kind of consent from the property owner. Why are we not allowing any of it? Well, the reason is that a lot of our parking spaces don't fully aligned with the property frontage downtown. And so there will probably be some overlining, over alignment of a parklet, but we want to provide some flexibility for that. But there is a limit, and so we're setting it at 5 feet. But we'd like to have your input on that as well too. If you have input, we'd like to hear from you. Other things are, we want to make sure that parklets are actively used. And we've had some difficulty in defining what is active use. And we'd like to hear from you on this one. What we have proposed, and we'd like to know whether you think this is too rigid or not rigid enough, and that we are proposing that you need to have a minimum use of 5 days a week at 4 hours per day. And we'd really like to hear what you think about that. Is that too rigid? Is that not rigid enough? Please let us know. Other things are requiring 6 feet of clear on the sidewalk next to your parklet. So during the pandemic, we relaxed our standards a lot more than we normally do, just because we wanted to promote economic activity. Before the pandemic, we required 8 foot of clear on the sidewalk for pedestrian use going by. During the pilot program, we allowed it to go down to a minimum of 4 foot clear. And that's because that's the federal standard. The ADA standard is 4 feet. So we really can't go beyond that. But going from the public input we heard in the survey last year, and the need to provide the ADA space, we feel comfortable in requiring 6 foot of clear space. A lot of that that feedback we got was that it was hard to go through a parklet area, so there's a lot of clutter. There was some difficulty of some folks getting through and having to go through sort of a maze to get through things like host stands and heaters and just a lot of things on the sidewalk. And so we really want to get back to the 6 feet of clear on the sidewalk area. Okay, here's just a sample project layout, just showing what we'll be looking for in an application. I won't go over all the details, but I'll just draw your attention to a couple of things. We're looking at what the separation is between traffic and the parklet. We'll be requiring a more rigid parklet structure, so that if God forbid an errant vehicle hits it from the side or from one of the sides or from the roadside, that it can withstand a certain level of force. We'll be looking at, like I mentioned, that 6 feet minimum clear. We'll also be looking at making sure there's no obstructions to the gutter flow, so that when it rains, that the parklet isn't covering the gutter area. We'll be looking at whether you'll be encroaching into the neighboring frontage. So when you see the guide, make sure to take a look at this project layout, because I think it provides a helpful tool for you. Okay, transitioning to a fee. So as we heard in the public input we got, we will be transitioning to a user fee to recover the city costs. This includes parking revenue as well as maintenance. And we've estimated that the full cost to the city of removing a parking space is about $8,000 per year per space. And that includes parking revenue loss as well as maintenance. So that includes paving the street. It includes sweeping around it. We've had to do manual sweeping around those areas. It also includes tree trimming. We have to get a boom truck out there to trim those trees. And a lot of times you get those trees falling onto the parklet. So it's about maintenance to doing all that work that's required. The city council will decide what percentage of these costs to charge to the business. And so on July 5th and the 19th, we'll be bringing this to the city council, and we'll be getting input from them on what percentage of that cost they think is the appropriate balance to provide to businesses. I mean, to charge for businesses. If you are proposing a nonprofit or a community, or you're a community group who wants to do a parklet, we're proposing that you're a fee exempt, just because it isn't a commercial interest and you're doing it for a public benefit. I'll go over some highlights of the approval process. We wanted to mesh this parklet program as much as possible with the already existing protocol for removing a parking space for sidewalk widening. Back in 2009, the City Council approved a process for that. And that involved notification of both sides of a block, as well as downtown SLO, at least 30 days prior to a decision. And that the permit application would be done at the community development director level. And after approval of a permit, appeals would go to the City Council. So we wanted to mesh this in with this. But we want to hear what you think as well too, and if you have input on this approval process. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Transitioning to the permit program. So right now, all open SLO parklet holders, you're current until the end of June of this year, which corresponds with our fiscal year. Beyond that, when council approves the program in July, and we have a first reading of the ordinance on the 5th and a second on the 19th, we'll be transitioning to the new program. And so we'll have a little bit of a grace period between when you'll need to have the new permit. Our proposal right now is to have to allow some time for those people with current parklets who want to transition to a new one, to have some time to look at all their design standards, see are they in compliance? Do they need to make any adjustments? And so what we're proposing is giving some leeway and providing until January 1st to have your permit. We'd like to have your input on that. Do you think that's too long? Is it not long enough? And in putting together this proposal for the program, we're thinking about a lot of the restaurants and businesses downtown. They're still recovering from the pandemic and maybe dealing with staffing issues still. So we wanted to be flexible and provide enough time for you to get all your ducks in a row for a permit. Having said that, if you have a current parklet and you do not wish to move forward to the permanent program, we want to see some kind of intentionality that you want to transition to the new program. And so if you are not, what we're looking at now is removing those parklets a lot sooner than January 1st. And then January 1st, once you have your new permit for the permit program, our proposal was to allow a couple of months to be able to actually bring your parklet into compliance or build a new one if you need to do that. And then fees for the first year. So going back to what I mentioned about rolling out this program gently, just because of the economic recovery from the pandemic, our proposal is to roll this out at 50% of the fee the first year, and then rolling over to 100% in subsequent years. And all this is subject to council approval in July. Okay, so the review period is open now for the downtown, for the outdoor dining guide. You could find that probably most easiest going to openslo.org. There will be a link there for the document, and you can also find a link to our Open City Hall site where you can actually go and leave a statement and see what other people are saying. We released the document yesterday, and we've already found already more than 14 statements that have been really helpful for us. So yeah, feel free to go in there, leave a statement. You can also find out updates on where we're at in the process as well too. Okay, next steps. Like I said, we're in the public review period now. On May the 19th, we'll be bringing this to the Active Transportation Committee for input within their purview of bicycle and pedestrian transportation. And then on May 26th, we'll have a public workshop at the SLO Library. This workshop is geared more towards the public as opposed to business owners, but feel free to come to that one as well too. I think it'd be good for the public to hear your input at that forum as well. Comments are due by the 28th of this month. And then going forward from that, based off the comments we get, we'll be putting together a staff report and recommendation for the ordinance. And then we'll have the council hearings on July 5th and the 19th. Just a few other questions. I got a set of questions from the Downtown Association, and I want to make sure I hit on all of those. I think I hit most of them in the presentation, but there are a few that I didn't. So I wanted to put them here to make sure that I got it. So I'll just go through these super quickly. One is, will there be a prohibition on businesses who already have outdoor dining options? We haven't proposed that. I think it's a good question. I think we fully understand that if you already have outdoor dining elsewhere on your property, it makes sense to really scrutinize whether you really want to have that that parklet. But we haven't made a recommendation on a prohibition. Could there be a cap on the number of parklets allowed per block? We have not made a recommendation for that, although I will say that a lot of this will be dictated by your particular location. So if you're located near a loading zone or really close to a driveway, that would probably play more of a role regarding whether you can have a parklet in front of your property than having a cap. But if there's input, if there is interest in a cap, we'd like to hear what you think, and feel free to let us know. Where do the fees go? So with the sidewalk dining, the sidewalk cafes and the tables and chairs permits, those are currently received, and every year they're allocated towards maintenance and other needs. So our idea was to bring this in line with that, so that every year when those fees are brought in, those fees will be allocated to the parking fund and maintenance based on how much of the cost that the city council decides to put on the parklet operator. How does a parklet program fit with the downtown concept plan to widen sidewalks? Yes, the downtown concept plan does have a plan to widen our sidewalks. I think we see the parklets as a transitionary phase between what we have now and moving towards widening the sidewalks to provide more space for pedestrians. And so I think it's a good transition move to get to that phase. And Luke, if you want to provide more information on that, I'd welcome that. And then lastly, given that businesses have had parklets for free for over 2 years, can the program start at 100% fee? And that's all entirely possible. I think we're trying to be flexible and be gentle to the downtown businesses still recovering from the pandemic. But if there's an interest in going to 100% fee right off the bat, we'd like to hear from you. And that's all I have for my presentation, and look forward to hearing about the questions.
Thank you, Adam. Appreciate that level of detail. And I did put the draft guidelines in the chat so people can look at that and review it, which obviously will take some time. I have a question about the cost. So it was clear in your presentation that you are giving the power to council to decide the percentage of the fee that is lost by parking. So I have a two-part question with that. One, will staff be providing options of those percentages to council so that they can make a selection, or is it just going to be you decide? And second, what if a parklet is in a spot that is currently not allocated to parking? Let's say a parklet is in a red zone, which would not be used for parking and would not therefore be losing that revenue.
Yeah, so I'll hit your second question first. If it's in a red zone or say a loading zone or other zone, we have to look at that on a case-by-case basis. There are a lot of things like, does the area provide adequate sight distance? Yeah, it's hard to say on a blanket basis, but in the guidelines, we do have information about, if it's within the sight lines, we probably would not be able to allow it. But it all depends on the location. And then going to your question about the fees, there will be a recommendation that staff will make. I think we wanted to hear a lot of what the public thinks here first before making that recommendation. It will be up to council, but yeah, we would like to make a recommendation from the staff level, just so the council has that, and we could provide some level of method for why we came up with that.
Okay, I think most of the questions that I'm hearing just in general outside of this Zoom room are about how much it will cost and what the timeline is. So getting some more clarity about that would be very helpful for the businesses. We do have some questions in the chat as well. the question of would the fee go into the parking fund? I think you answered that, but since Council Member Marks is on the call, do you want to explicitly answer that again?
Certainly. So, so the way it works with the sidewalk cafe and the tables and chairs, is that those fees are brought in and then they're allocated on a yearly basis to those programs. And so we saw that we saw the Parklet program working similarly. You know, a lot of it depends on how much of the cost the city council decides to put on the Parklet owner. But based off that, those fees would go into the parking fund as well as maintenance needs.
Great. And then we have another question of how do we show intention?
You know, we're still figuring that part out, but we're thinking it may be something like you need to submit your application or maybe a pre-app by a certain time. So it may be like maybe a month or so after council approves a program that would need to happen. We haven't fully worked out those details, but we've heard from folks already that you know, if you don't have an interest in continuing with your Parklet, that those should come out much earlier than January 1st. And so we're sort of more moving forward with that. But if there are other ideas or opinions, we'd like to hear from you and what you think about that.
Yeah, I'll expand on that too, Adam and Tina and everybody. We've already had a lot of conversations with businesses that have Parklets that aren't being fully utilized or invested in. And so, you know, it's not like, I think it's hard to have like a super strict definition, but I'll give you an example. So if business owner A has a Parklet and there's planter boxes that aren't being maintained, the plants are dead, it's dirty all the time, there's never anyone out there, you know, we're already having those conversations like, hey, what's going on? You know, we can't keep this in an ongoing way if you're not really utilizing it, investing in it, and making this an addition to the public environment. So if there's businesses showing interest saying, yes, I've already working with an architect, or I'm working on designs, I'm in the interim, I'm investing and making sure I'm showing a good faith effort that I want this to continue in a responsible way, then I think we'll be flexible in working towards the permanent solutions for those businesses. Where if there's folks that clearly aren't showing a good faith effort to even maintain what they have now, then it's probably not a good indicator that they're willing to move forward to a more permanent installation. And with those, we'll be working towards removing Parklets that aren't really being utilized.
Thank you. We have another question about the utilization. So you mentioned 4 hours a day for 5 days a week is kind of the minimum activation level. I'll just be candid. You guys can disagree with me. I think that's a little bit low. Laura has a question in the chat that says, could shared Parklets be an option? Like if a coffee house or breakfast joint used it till 2 p.m. and then an evening dining establishment used it in the evening. Of course, that would depend on interbusiness cooperation. That might be one solution, but downtown, as we know, is a 24-hour environment. So having something unutilized for 20 hours a day, 2 days a week, I didn't do the math in my head, but that's a lot of non-activation.
Yeah, I think with Tina, and I think those collaborations among businesses, I think, is something we want to encourage. If there's something, you know, that could be used in the morning, for instance, for a coffee house, and then maybe in the evening by a restaurant, I think that'd be a great way to do that.
We've also got a question about the tables and chairs on the sidewalk. So if you have a sidewalk dining program and a Parklet, would you need to have 2 separate permits?
Yes.
We can handle that in a single encroachment permit, but you'll have to provide those level of details on your application showing your footprint for your Parklet design. It'll essentially be one application and type of permit gets issued. Just the details would vary based on what you're requesting.
Okay.
Thanks,
You would be paying for the use fee for using the public space within the parking lane and within the sidewalk. So that might be a decision maker for some folks of whether they're willing to take on that cost. And just I'll just echo back on a previous question too about, are we going to have a huge tiering of fee structures if you're in a zone that is paid parking, a zone that's not paid parking, a loading zone? The intent is not just strictly to recoup the parking fund. That, you know, it's important to us. We want to make sure that the parking fund is remaining solvent, but also just any use of the public right of way for private profit could be considered a gift of public funds to a private business. And so there's an impact on other community members of not being able to access that space. And so we're trying to find a sweet spot where there's a fee that's reasonable, that recoups some of the costs to the city, but also establishes kind of an intent for business to really use the space, where if they're not willing to pay that fee and pay for their impact on the public right away, then they probably shouldn't be exploring that as an option. So there's a need just to recoup some of those costs, both just to collect our own costs that we're expending, but also to make sure it's fair and that we're not giving away public resources to private entities.
Thanks for that clarification. We have a couple more chat questions, but I do want to call on Laura Ambrose. She raised her hand. Laura, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm sitting outside our Parklet in Davis. My question is, when you're talking about what the cost is to the city, you mentioned $8,000, and I was confused because if you were to break it down by how much you would actually be getting in parking revenue versus you were talking about the expenses to the city in terms of street cleaning and tree pruning and things like that. I would assume that really the only cost that you're really changing is if we take that parking spot in lieu of getting the parking meter fees. Am I correct on that?
So the cost that Adam cited that's the total cost to the city to keep these parklets in place. And there's about half of that cost is just the direct parking meter revenue loss. And that can depend on location. Some meters bring in higher revenue, some are non-metered, some bring in lower revenue. But on top of that, you have an example, street maintenance costs. So right now, this summer, we talked about a paving project. We're paving around all the parklets as to not interrupt the businesses. If those parklets go away at some point, we need to have some funds to come back and refresh the pavement on those spots. Also, parklets that are bolting, structural elements into the sidewalks, the streets. If the parklets come out, those need to be repaired. We have increased costs in the ways that we have to try to manage tree pruning. That is different from if we had no parklets in the right of way. And also we have contractors coming every single week and manually sweeping all the streets and flushing out the debris in the parklets. So those are all the costs that we would not necessarily be incurring if we didn't have a parklet program.
Okay. So I guess to me, what would seem more fair is to recoup what the city is losing in the way of revenue. I understand there are some additional costs with the parklets, but that gets me to my second question, which is there any plan by the city that might allow for a more permanent structure so that instead of just the parklet sitting in parking spaces, there might be sidewalk widening where we could look at increasing some sidewalk dining that would be up against the building because there might be the option to reroute the sidewalk?
Yeah, that would actually be our preference in terms of a long-term plan. A parklet by definition is a temporary structure. They're not intended to be in that manner in perpetuity. The long-term plans, if you look through the downtown concept plan and some of the other projects that have come through the downtown, either that were city-led or as part of private development, have looked at widening sidewalks to increase that space. Our, perfect situation would be in the long term, we have wider sidewalks, and all of these are sidewalk cafes that are out of the street itself. That makes things a lot easier, I think, for both the businesses and for the city. But with that said, sidewalk widening can be very expensive and very challenging from a design standpoint. It's also very difficult to do in like a piecemeal manner where you have, a 20-foot segment of widened sidewalk and then another 20-foot. There's drainage challenges. Also, in some cases, you have to completely regrade the road based on the utilities and cross slopes. So it's something we're interested in. It's likely going to be done as part of like larger capital projects, either led by the city or if new redevelopment projects come in, looking at ways to partner with the development representatives to make those types of improvements. So that is a long-term interest, but it's going to depend on funding resources and it's going to take time.
Thank you.
Okay, we have some other questions from the chat. Who would be responsible for monitoring the use of parklets by non-customers?
That would be up to the parklet operator. So it'll be just like if someone was in their restaurant.
Yeah, these are, and we work
Yeah.
closely with our city attorney's office and our traffic enforcement, or not traffic, but just police enforcement. And that the way that the Parklet permits are essentially set up is just like if you had a special events permit for a private event in public right of way. If there's people using the space that you're not supportive of, you have the authority to contact the right authorities to help remove them if they're not being compliant.
And the same is true even if the business that has the permit isn't open at that time.
That's correct.
Okay. And would the hours of operation be like within a defined range? For example, like from 12 p.m. to 8 p.m. Would we require, or would you require Parklet operators to define the hours that they intend to use them? And would there be accountability for that through the proposal project process?
So currently with the tables and chairs and the sidewalk cafes, their operating hours are from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. So our proposal was to bring the Parklets one in line with that. But if there's input on that, we would like to hear from you if that should be different.
Okay, well, I'm sure other people have questions, but I have some more if you will entertain them for a moment. You mentioned that the unused parklets would be coming out before January 1st, which would be the deadline for stating intent of continuing the parklet. But when exactly would that happen?
Yeah, Luke and I have been talking about this. So honestly, we haven't quite figured that one out yet. What we need to look at some of our internal processes. You know, I think one of the challenges is that once we get approval of the permanent program, is it's not only going to be some work on the part of the parklet owner, but also for staff to process all these as well too. So we haven't figured that date out yet, but we'll try to come up with something before the council hearing, if not even earlier than that. Luke, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the intent is say, so July permanent programs adopted, we say, okay, these next several months, here's your time to work on a design to bring your installation into compliance, make sure that you're consistent with the operating requirements, get your application in. Basically, we'd be shooting towards the end of the year to get any applications approved for folks that want to continue doing this. Folks that aren't interested in continuing with a permanent parklet or sidewalk dining, we'd be working with them over that time to get a timeline for removal of what they have in the right of way. And basically, if you don't have an approved permit by the end of the year, whatever you have in the right of way needs to be out. For folks that are able to work through the process, get a design approved and have an approved permit, the intent of having that additional flexibility for those that have an approved permit through March of next year is to be able to have time to come in and actually construct whatever upgrades they would be needing. We would have honestly pushed that up, but we do have a construction moratorium within the downtown core during the holiday season. So that was one factor that we said, let's get your permits done by the end of the year if you're showing an intent to move forward. And if you're not, let's get you out of the right of way by then. And then you have a few months into the next year to actually get your improvements installed. Hopefully sooner. And I've talked to a lot of businesses that I want to move forward sooner than that to make this nice. And that is an ideal scenario.
Okay. Pierre, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, of course, I think all of us might agree that widening the sidewalks is the answer to most of these problems, and is the permanent ultimate solution. But I understand what Luke's talking about in terms of the cross slope of the streets and the regrading and so forth. It's pretty complicated. One of the things I'd like to just bring up as an issue is initially the Parklet program was intended to replace the interior dining areas of restaurants during the pandemic to get people out of the interior spaces. But now it's moved into another phase where it's adding additional seating capacity to those businesses that they never had before. And if you look at the history of parking funding in the city, there was an in lieu program where someone wants to build some seating for a restaurant, they have to pay an in lieu fee for the parking requirement required for that particular use. So that has now gone away, and I don't see that integrated into the permitting process. Now that could be seen as an anti-business position, it's possible, but it seems a little unfair for people that are doing new construction to have to pay those in lieu fees if people who are just expanding into the street don't have to. So that's kind of a dual thing. And even those folks that want to put a parklet into an area where there's no paid parking now, the increased seating does create a demand on the parking infrastructure. So it really makes sense that they would pay a fee into the parking fee for that. Those are just some comments more than questions. A little concern about storm drainage, stormwater management, which of course widening sidewalks will take care of. Loading zones, of course, are always an issue. The other thing I had a question about was design review. Who's reviewing the design? How is the approval of that being done? Is the CHC or the ARC or anybody else get involved in this process?
Yeah, so the way we proposed the Parklet program is to bring it in line basically with the tables and chairs and the sidewalk cafes. And so basically the approval is at the community development director level. But as you'll see in the guide, if there are any structural elements that are proposed, the director does have the authority to bring it to one of the committees, such as the Planning Commission for input.
Great. We have a question too in the chat about the Monterey Street. I think, Rami, are you referring to like Upper Monterey where the parking lots have been turned into patio space? I think we don't have any downtown. Do you want to clarify that?
Right next to, where Finney's and Giuseppe's is, right over there on Monterey. Is that technically Parklet, I guess, were those spaces before?
Yes.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Luke.
Oh, thanks. I was going to say, yes. And one of the key questions we asked of the city council when we had the study session back last summer was, we talked about, should we continue with parklets? We also had another focused discussion topic was, what do we want to do with the configuration of Monterey Street? Early on in the pandemic, we had done some full closures during weekends and evenings. We had some challenges with other retailers having access for deliveries, trash collection and things like that. And then, so we asked the questions, do we want to pull everything out and go back to the previous configuration? Do we want to keep this as one way? And the direction that the city council said was keep this as it is right now, which is, half the streets open to traffic with one-way travel. The other half is essentially closed to utilize space for restaurants. There's the bike plaza that's used for bike parking during farmers market and special events. And so the final direction was keep it in that configuration as it's in now, but make some aesthetic enhancements. So you'll see we replaced the ugly plastic barricades with planter boxes, and we'll be looking for other opportunities to kind of activate that aesthetically. And then the long-term plan in the downtown concept plan is essentially to reconstruct that whole stretch of Monterey as a shared street, or there's a term called a woonerf, that basically you bring the street and sidewalk to a flush level with decorative pavers where it looks more like a kind of an expanded pedestrian plaza where vehicles are allowed, but it's designed in a way that the speeds are very slow and it's prioritizing people walking and on foot and not necessarily as a through street. So the current plan is to retain that as is until the funding's there to move forward with the long-term permanent improvements to fully reconstruct that street.
I hope that answered your question, Rami. And thanks for the clarification about that. I know other people are also asking about Monterey long-term plans, so that is exciting to learn about. Whitney, we have been really pleased to see how the farmers market has integrated the parklets. What questions do you have?
Yes, thank you. I have a lot of questions, so I'll probably send most of them to you guys, but I will generalize them. One being the existing parklets. What does it look like in terms, it looks like you're trying to put in a bunch of parameters about a new application process. Are you currently auditing the existing parklets, and how does that look transitioning? So for example, the ones on Choro Street that are in ineligible areas, are you communicating with those businesses that they're going to be going away because it's ineligible, or how are you going to communicate that they're exempt from that?
Yeah, so we'll have sort of two processes going on. One is processes, applications for new parklets with the new program, but also bringing up to our standard the existing ones, right? And so we'll be working with the existing parklet owners to make sure that they're fulfilling all the design requirements. A lot of them actually, probably most of them already do, as far as maybe not the structural elements of it, but the elements of, the buffer from the street, the buffer from either side of the parking. There'll probably be some little tweaks that need to happen, and we'll be communicating with the existing parklet owners on that and getting them up to the new standard and communicating that to them.
Well, sorry, I don't think I was clear. I wasn't referring to the design element. I was referring to the ones that are in like loading zones and other non-parking spots. In the draft that you sent over, if I understood it correctly, it says that those areas are not eligible to become parklets. So how are you going to meet that moment where certain parklets that already exist in those areas will no longer be an eligible area for another business who maybe only has a loading zone in front of them to set up?
Yeah, I think the intent with that is there's certain streets and locations that are completely, it's affirmed, not eligible. Streets that have high traffic speeds, no parking lane whatsoever. I think for locations like that, the intent is that if you're proposing something that would displace an existing loading zone or passenger loading zone, that it's not a default like eligibility. It'd be something that require further review from traffic, parking division, and fire. And in a lot of those cases, they might get a no and say, this just isn't going to work in the long term. But it'd be closely involving input from Gavin and his team to say, well, is this impactful? Is there, can we repurpose to recover this loading space somewhere nearby? So it's not a firm no, but I'd say parklets that have a request that would display something like that have a more difficult path forward.
Well, thank you. And then my follow-up, just last question, is for the parklets that currently exist that are not being utilized, particularly just because of storefront hours or whatever the case may be. Like Luke, I know I've communicated with you about the Flower House one, just seeing how the engagement level is. What is the timeline for removing, auditing the intention of the business to start using the parklet for you guys? Another one on that same front for like Blast that is currently doing a renovation right now. Their parklet remains, but it's not being utilized. So what is the monitoring or accountability on that business to maintain it?
Yeah, so I think we kind of stated previously that we're kind of working that out internally about what that timeline will be. But I think the intention is to remove those parklets sooner rather than later. And as Luke mentioned, we're already actually reaching out to a lot of those parklet owners who do not wish to move forward and are trying to set a path on when we can have those removed.
Yeah, and there's several that we already have acknowledged, like there's what you have now is not going to be compliant, whether you're encroaching in front of another business or you're just flatly not utilizing it. So the Flower House, they're already going to remove their parklet. That's agreed upon. And we're just working with them to try to get a contractor out to take their framing system away so we can clean up all the decking pieces and get that parking zone open back up. And there's others we would give them similar ultimatums, say, hey, in the next month, I need you to have a date for when you're modifying this parklet or it's coming out. So as we're hopefully moving past a lot of the more challenging impacts of COVID, that we will feel more comfortable being aggressive with cleaning these things up. We've erred on the side of flexibility over the last 2 years so that we're not, significantly economically impacting businesses that are barely struggling. But at some point, we need to have a fair use of the right of way. And so there'll be more firm expectations and instructions for folks that clearly aren't using them or aren't planning to move forward in a permanent way to start getting that stuff out of the street.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I see Stephanie has her hand raised.
Hi, good morning. So thanks for this. And my question, maybe just comment, is my biggest sort of concern around the program as I've seen it evolve is, of the different types of businesses, there's restaurants and bars and trying to recover, as well as retailers and other types of businesses that are trying to recover. And so parklets clearly does, create a little bit more challenge and disruption for businesses that are retailers or service-based businesses where accessibility to downtown is important. And we're all looking forward to the cultural district garage being a way that can address some of the issues around parking and this loss of parking that we'll see with parklets. So my my question is around, as you're making recommendations to council, both on timing and fees, if there's any sort of consideration analysis going into the impact to the timing of the cultural district garage as this comes into play with this program. So for example, if you provide different options to council about what fees should be for the business versus what the city would cover, and it sounds like allocation of the fees coming in, it's a little bit to be determined as to what goes into the parking fund versus other types of maintenance fees. Are you also overlaying or looking at, here's the potential impact of delays to construction of the garage or having enough revenue available for that parking garage?
It's a great question. I'm wondering, Gavin, if you might have some input on how the strategies are overlapping between getting on the POMO structure built. I would say like the Parklet program is not going to cause us to defer construction or something like that, but obviously we do want the parking fund to be whole and helping fund maintenance and construction of those garages. But Gavin, I'm wondering if you have some input on how you see this, because there's some competing interests in that. We love things that activate the downtown, but we also want a healthy parking environment. And I know that directly impacts Gavin and his program the most.
Correct. Yeah. So, our goal in parking is to recoup some of the funds that we are losing through the Parklet program. We don't expect to make them all back on every single space. As I think Luke and Adam indicated earlier, certain spaces generate more money than others. That range is pretty varied in parking. Our core downtown area, especially like the Higuera area, generates about $7,000 on an annual basis. Some of the other areas where we have Parklet generate about $3,500 annually. So it's hard for us to say we're going to charge one area higher for a permit than others. But our goal is to try to get as much of that revenue back to the parking fund as possible. With regard to our plan for the Cultural Arts District parking structure, we are moving forward with that. We begin utility work this fall. So I'm excited to see that happening. And then we begin groundbreaking next spring. Some of these funds will help us get us there, but in general, the cost of the construction has gone up significantly, and we are looking at methods to cover that cost. So our bonding amount will be drastically increased. So hopefully some of these funds cover that, but it's not going to make up the difference with what we've been charging for the past few years anyway.
Great. Thanks for taking that, Gavin. And I know we're at 10:21. We would like to be mindful of everyone's time today, as we did schedule this meeting to go until 10:30. Gavin, are there any other parking issues related to the specific topics we're talking about today with the parklets and outdoor dining or the resealing project that's going to be going on that you'd like to address?
Yeah, so I can talk on some of that. I think Jennifer and Adam covered a lot of the stuff, in depth, and that's great. I know we're going to have concerns regarding the paving project. We noticed it last year, and we had a lot of inquiries about that. Parking will take a much more active role as we're going to be more impactful in the downtown area. So we will be out there in a larger presence, hopefully being able to notice people and get them to park in the correct areas. I think the transitions we've made over the last few years in technology lend us to more appropriately communicate that areas are closed for parking as we go through this paving project, which is great. We have the ability in our mobile app to notice customers that are trying to start parking sessions that they're not eligible to start a parking session in that area. Additionally, we can push information to our multi-space pay stations that our single space meters couldn't do, and notice customers that the area will be closed during a certain date range or time period, which is great. And I think as we move forward, we're definitely looking at how we communicate to the customers leading into the paving project. We'll be doing a lot of outreach like we did the last couple of summers to businesses in the area. We'll be talking to delivery vehicles the weeks prior to the construction period. And then we'll be doing a lot of social media pushes, noticing customers that different areas will be closed. So I think we have the tools now with the adjustments we've made to properly communicate that.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I think what we're going to ask now is, how would it be most helpful for you to receive feedback? I know there's the open SLO or the town hall, open city. What is that called? I'm blanking.
Open City Hall.
Open City Hall. Thank you. Goodness, not enough coffee this morning. Is that the preferred method? Would you prefer direct emails, phone calls? What would be most helpful for you as this plan is preparing to go forward?
Well, the Open City Hall provides opportunity to give comment, and others can see your comment and you can see others. You could also like some of those comments. So that's one really helpful avenue. They could also just email me or call me through the traditional means. You know, those my email address is on the screen here. So either of those are all options available to folks.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We're going to launch one more poll because this is an evolving process and we want to make sure that we are getting the information to you. So thanks to the representatives from the City of SLO who have been sharing this information with us. We understand there's going to be more coming. We'd be interested to know from all of you how you would like to receive information about these projects, and we will try to meet you in the moment. And Adam, maybe you could post that Open City Hall link in the chat as well. And we will make sure this session is being recorded. We will be sharing this on our Downtown SLO YouTube channel. We'll be sending it out to our entire membership so that if you know people, your neighbors, or fellow business owners who wanted to participate this morning, but for whatever reason were not able to, we'll make this available. And of course, there is all of the information about the full plan on the city's website. So thanks so much for being here this morning. We are delighted to be bringing back these business education workshops. And I would not be doing my job if I didn't put in a quick promotion for some of our Downtown SLO programs. We're delighted to say that we are operating a pop-up roller rink in Mission Plaza through May 22nd. It is a heck of a good time, so please come on out there. We do still have tickets available. It's a really fun activation. And we will also be launching our Concerts in the Plaza series in June. Very excited about bringing that program back for 10 weeks. This week at the farmers market is law enforcement night on Thursday. So you'll see lots of different law enforcement agencies from around the country, or around the county rather. And then later this month is Public Works night at the farmers market. So that's always a good time to see all of the heavy equipment and bring folks out for that. Thanks so much for being here today. We appreciate all of you. We hope you're doing well and that your business is thriving. And please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions for us or for any of the presenters who are here this morning. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Adam, you want to stay on for just a minute? Oh, I lost him.